Okay, good morning. So the first thing is I've given you a schedule. There's two sides to it. You want to look at the one that says liturgy class. That's us. All right. And just note, because we've been off for a couple of weeks, we have the winter break coming up. I have a bar mitzvah workshop coming up. And so things are sporadic, and I apologize. If we could just get rid of these holidays, everything would be great. No, thank you. No one's voting for that. We are going to meet next Sunday. How many people here think they can be here? Okay, that's a pretty resounding statement. Okay, so we'll meet next Sunday. The following week, I have a bar mitzvah workshop, so I can't. But the Hebrew class is meeting if you're taking that. And then we'll continue on December 15th. And then we'll come back in January for 2 more sessions. No. See, we're meeting on the days that are listed here. Okay? Good? All right. It's good to see everybody again. If you would take in hand the Siddur. Let's open up. We're going back. We finished last week the blessing of the Amidah on history. God is in history, finishes up Magen Avraham. God is the shield of Abraham. Today we're continuing with the second blessing, and if you give me a second, I don't know why I can't find it. There we go. It'll get here. All right, we are on page 160. 160. 60. And this one doesn't want to separate 160. Come on. It won't open up. There we go. All right, and where we're starting is a Tagibor. You see where it says second blessing? All right, second bracha. So let's read this together. You are ever almighty Adonai. Ata gibor le'olam Adonai. You are ever mighty Adonai. You give life to the dead. Great is your saving power. At certain times of the year we say you cause the wind to blow and the rain to fall. You sustain the living through kindness and love, and with great mercy give life to the dead. You support the falling, heal the sick, loosen the chains of the bound, keep faith with those who sleep in the dust. Who is like you, Almighty, and who can be compared to you? The sovereign who brings death and life, that's not what it says in Hebrew, and causes redemption to flourish. You are faithful in bringing life to the dead. Praise are you, Baruch atah Adonai, who gives life to the dead. Okay, that's the second blessing. Sound familiar? We all sing Mechalkel Hayim. It's a sing-along. All right, what are we singing along to? That's the question. That's what we're going to look at today. The second blessing, the first one was God in history. This one we refer to as Gevurot, God's power, God's relationship to the world in nature, in the world around us, contemporary times. God's power, it's Le'olam va'ed, Ata gibor le'olam Adonai. Your power is forever. It doesn't wax and wane. It is eternal. We get to the phrase, Mechalkel Hayim bechesed. God sustains all of life with chesed, with loving compassion. And so God has put into the world all that we need. All of our needs can be met through the world that God has created. That includes food and water and clothing, etc. If people are in the world are starving, and they are, it is not a matter of there's not enough in the world. It's a matter of distribution. Okay? God has provided enough for everybody. If someone is starving, it's a function of we didn't do something right as a species. So God has given us, and that is a sense, by providing us with all that, that is an expression of God's chesed, God's loving kindness. With human beings, when we talk about power, you usually understand it as an ability to destroy. Man's power is related in those who can cause the greatest damage, lay waste to the greatest numbers. God's power is described very differently here. God heals the sick. God frees the slaves, upholds the fallen, and then God gives life to the dead. Acts of Gemilut Chasadim. That last one probably struck you, and we'll get there. But the point here is, while giving of life is the greatest demonstration of God's power. God's power is evidenced in the daily mundane. One of the reasons, those of you in the first class heard me say that a blessing is a way of elevating the mundane by taking every animal eats, every creature on earth eats. By stopping and recognizing things as coming from God, we elevate the mundane to a status of holy. The regular routines, because of our mindsets, become different. And so in here, in announcing what God does, we are also challenged then to imitate God, to perform acts for freeing the captive. We're acts of all these different ways of healing, of setting free. All right? When we say we free the captive, it can mean many different things. Obviously, we know what it means in its literal sense. All right? We have hostages. All right? We know what this means. In addition, though, according to the Talmud, the words denote the ability to just sit up in bed and getting up in the morning. At night, it's like you're constrained. And in the morning, you wake up and you have the ability to move. Anyone who's ever been bedridden understands this blessing very clearly. The phrase can also be used metaphorically and to refer to someone who is releasing someone from intellectual or psychological bounds, such as superstitious beliefs or prejudice towards others. So there's a lot that's implied here. And this is why you can write midrashim. The prayer book, in a sense, is almost a midrash, and you can write midrash on midrashim. All right? How do we understand that God heals the sick in today's world? We understand that through the hands of doctors. All right? I thank every doctor when I've gone through with this process with my eyes. They are the hands of God in action. The wisdom they've acquired to do what they're doing, that wisdom comes from God. And so I see them as the hand of God in helping me in the process. We have here the line, Mashiv HaRuach u'morid HaGashem, who causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Well, if you're going to include God's power, this is the right place to include. If you want to talk about it, this is the right blessing to put it into. It's all about when you get to this. In the rabbinic period, they were dependent on agriculture. All right? Phrases were included to reflect that concern. Again, the prayer book is man's concerns at different points in history. Clearly, rainfall was a critical issue to them. And so when we're saying this, not only are we appreciative of rain in our own world, we're reflecting on the history of Jews and what they've experienced, humanity, and what they've experienced. And by the way, it's not intended as a petition. We don't say, give us. Atah Gibor, we say, God, you are the source of rain. The petitions come later in the weekday service and later in the Amidah. This is simply, you, God, do this. This is sort of this hint at, by the way, okay? But it's really a declarative statement, not a request. All right, now we come to the main theme in this paragraph. What repeats over and over? Mechayeh hametim, who gives life to the dead. All right? It says it 5 times in this paragraph. Everyone is curious about and interested to know about the nature of the afterlife. Anybody here have no thoughts about it? Right? As we get older, all the more so. Right? If people were sure that there was life after death, if we were sure, we might behave differently. On the other hand, if we were sure there isn't, we might behave differently. Okay? Both. Okay? And so the entire question of morality, of reward and punishment, and why bad things happen to good people would be even more difficult if we did believe that nothing existed beyond. Like most religions, Judaism does believe in an afterlife. Let me say that again. We do believe in an afterlife. We don't focus on it as much as for Christianity. This is a dominant theme. For Jews, the purpose of life here is here. How do you make the world a better place? But that doesn't mean there's no discussion of the afterlife. In very broad strokes, and then I'll take it apart a little bit. In very broad strokes, Jews came to believe that at the end of days, at the end of time, the dead will be resurrected, mechayeh hametim, and come before God to account for their lives on earth. The righteous will be rewarded, the wicked shall be punished. The Jews, free from the yoke of exile, will return to their homeland, rebuild it, and become masters of their own identity. Whether or not that's one of the reasons, we often refer to Israel in our prayers as Reshit Smichat Geulatenu, as the beginning of the redemption. Okay? We believe that the temple will be rebuilt, or certainly in the Orthodox world, they believe the temple will be rebuilt and the cult will be restored. All right, we have all sorts of questions as more modern Jews. That the nations of the world will flock to study Torah with the Jewish people. That peace and justice will rule. That the tensions that now pervade the world will disappear. That the wolf shall lie with the lamb, dwell with the lamb. Right? My rabbi in Dallas had a great way for you. How do you have every day a lamb and you get a new lamb? You have a wolf, you get a new lamb every day. It works very wonderful. That the people will come to know and worship the God of Israel. And finally, this entire scenario will be brought to pass through the initiative of a charismatic figure, the Mashiach, a human being, by the way. No divinity to this character at all. A human being who is charismatic. And Mashiach simply means anointed with oil. That's all it means. Okay? The anointed one. We have several people in history we know as the anointed one. David is one. There's a number of others that we refer to in this way as well. Yeah. In today's world? I have no idea. I don't know, and by the outcome. Does the world have peace following? That's one of the statements about the last 2,000 years, and a Jewish proof for why Jesus would not serve as the Messiah. There's no second you don't get two tries. If you're the Messiah, you're the Messiah. Right? That would be a Jewish response. As to who gets to decide, it's not my job. Not me. I don't know. All right. Let's look at the Bible. What does the Bible say about the afterlife? Then we'll go to rabbinics, but we're going to start with the Bible. And you ain't going to like what the Bible has to say. The most common biblical name for the afterlife is the land of its deepest gloom is Sheol. We refer to going to Sheol. It's a term that appears throughout the Bible. It is the netherworld. It is the bowels of the earth. It is described as the pit. It is the limit of human awareness. It's a metaphor for God's ultimate mystery. In your packets, I have reading number 1, which I'll read, but you can follow along. This is from Job. Would you discover the mystery of God? Would you discover the limits of the Almighty? Higher than heaven, what can you know? Deeper than Sheol, what can you know? What can you do? What can you know? So, all right, it's obviously contrasted with heaven in some way. The Bible abounds with descriptions of Sheol. This is where you're not going to be happy. Where is it we're going according to the Bible? Its gates and bars make escape impossible. It is a monster with gaping jaws that aggressively devours all men and is never sated. It is a place of maggots and decay. Happy? Okay? To claim that one goes down to Sheol is to say that you descend into the bowels of the earth beyond the bounds of human awareness. You lose all relationship with God, all relationship with human beings, all relationships with anybody else that's gone to Sheol, all right, with anything that transpires on earth. And Sheol doesn't discriminate between the righteous and the evil. Everyone goes there, and it's non-existence. Even Jacob goes to Sheol, according to the Bible. So there's no issue of good or bad. Not my favorite part of the Bible. Another text which is very famous, that when the people look at it and say, well, this is about the resurrection. It's not. There's a text that is cited at an earlier date, and that's from Ezekiel 37. And there we have what is known as the vision of the dry bones. And here you have a dead body that is suddenly clothed with flesh, infused with breath, and brought back to life. But the key to understanding what that is saying is found in the text itself. All right? This is reading 2. This is from Ezekiel. O mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. We are doomed. Prophesy therefore, and say to them, thus says the Lord God, I am going to open your graves and life and lift you out of the grave. Should say, lift all my people and bring you to the land of Ezekiel. What this is talking about is not personal resurrection, but it's a reflection of the status of the state of Israel. They are suffering, and there is resurrection of the people. Things will get better. It's a symbolic text. It's a political statement, not a prophecy of resurrection. Why? Why is this the biblical perspective? 2 reasons I can offer you. The first is, and we see this continually, where are they getting the Bible? At Sinai. Theoretically, at Sinai. What happened right before Sinai? Egyptian slavery. There is an injunction against imitating the idolatrous practices of the cultures around us. Egypt was a religion of death. They focused on death almost exclusively. When the king died, they buried his wife with him. They took all his possessions with him because he was going off to the... She wasn't dead, by the way. Well, they probably killed her before, but yes. In other words, she wasn't in a process of dying. She was now. Okay. All right? You took your wife with you. You took your possessions with you because you were off to the afterworld, etc. Judaism rejects entirely this culture, this cultic practice, and the ways of the people around them. And so it became a religion that focused on life, and therefore, let's not go there. Let's not talk a lot about it. Death is death, right? And the other is a way of saying there is a sharp demarcation between God and human beings. God lives forever. Humans die. There's not eternity for human beings, is the Bible's perspective, because that would make them God. All right, anybody like this version? No, I usually don't get hands raised. You have a question? I see your mind working. Mm-hmm. Book by James Cool. I'm just repeating if you're online. Book by James. They can't hear you. I need to repeat. So I'm just going to repeat because people for online. No, Eric, it's not for them. It's for the people online. They can't hear you unless I say it into the mic. Okay? So James Kugel suggests there's an evolution of the understanding of oneself in relationship to God, that it changed over time.
Well, not just in relation to God, but your very sense of yourself.
As well as self, and understanding of self. Okay. The way human beings thought in those times because of the situations in which they found themselves was different, and therefore this concept of Sheol didn't terrify them in the way it might us. Okay? Is that accurate? Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, so something I read recently, it strikes a bell with me, and it made perfect sense. We're talking about who is getting the Torah. It's the people of Israel who've just come from 400 years of slavery. This is not a group that is deeply dedicated to theology. Okay? They're in a survival mode. And so the way things are expressed might be different than the way we understand them today, because they had to be. By definition, they were not equipped for the theological kinds of thinking that we would be in our world. You work 8 hours a day, that gives you 16 hours a day that you're not working. Right? You have time for theology, not as a slave. And so, yes, I think the nature of the people for whom the conversation was happening and the situation in which they found themselves, it was the right message in the right moment. I see. Well, that's where I'm going, so hold on. Okay. So, that the Bible, that the death of each human being is final, that God has no power over us after death, is the overwhelming testimony of the Tanakh, of the Bible. However, as the biblical age draws to a close, two doctrines, this is where you were going, Eric, enter into Jewish writings that, in a sense, overturn that understanding. One, first that enters Judaism, is that at some future point, God will raise at least some human bodies from the grave. Mechayeh hametim. The second is that the human body is mortal, but that every human being possesses a soul, which separates from the body at death and enjoys a continued existence with God. When the Bible uses the word nephesh, which we translate as soul, it's referring to the physical person. It counts this many souls. It is not referring to soul as we understand it. A new concept enters Judaism, that there is a distinction between body and soul. This comes from living among the Persians, the Zoroastrians, about 300 or 400 years before Jesus. So what you've got is an idea of a soul and continued existence that permeated Judaism as a result, and 300 or 400 years later, when Christianity arose, it was sitting there as a concept and waiting to be embraced as well. That's why we both accept this concept. So there's also look, could it have developed organically within the Jewish people? It could. The likelihood is it came from Persians, but let me give you the counter argument anyway. Here's the argument. If, in fact, God created the world and humanity in the first place, if God is the ultimate force whose power extends over all of nature and history, if God can send Israel into exile and then redeem it again, if God can every year renew the natural cycle, if God, as Isaiah 66 promises, God can create a new heaven and earth, then why can't God raise the dead from the grave? Then why can't God, in the words of Isaiah, destroy death forever? Why should God's power end at the moment of death? Why is death more powerful than God? Right, great book, Neil Gaiman's book, The Death of Death. That's exactly what he's saying. God will conquer death. And the rabbis canonized this in the prayer of Gevurot. That's why we saw it 5 times. Reading number 3. This is from Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is out of the Mishnah. It is rabbinic. Akiva ben Mihalel said, "Consider 3 things and you will not come to sin. Know where you have come, to where you are heading, and before whom you will give justification and accounting. From where have you come? From a putrid drop. To where are you heading? To a place of dirt, worms, and maggots. And before whom will you give justification and accounting? Before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He." That's rabbinic. That is not the Bible. There is no accounting in the Bible. You're gone. This is rabbinic. It reflects either the thinking I gave you, or more likely the Persian influence, the Zoroastrian influence. So we have these 2 ideas. We have Mechayeh Ametim, who raises the dead, and we have the principle of a soul that continues to live on. Both entered Judaism, but both were not equally stressed during Mishnaic times. One had greater influence than the other. In the early centuries of the Common Era, after the destruction of the temple, after the murder of a million Jews, messianic expectations are strong, as you can imagine. The Messiah's got to come and got to resolve this. And so the belief in the afterlife as expressed within the Amidah was, first of all, I'm sorry, let me jump ahead, let me jump back. So the idea of Mechayeh HaMeitim, which reflects messianic times, was the dominant view of the moment. The Messiah will come, all the dead will come back to life. As time goes on, the Messiah doesn't come. There is no, go 2,000 years without a state of Israel. And the idea of messianic hope and Mechayeh Amitim recedes to the background. And in that world, you have the Bar Kokhba revolution, you have continual loss, continual suffering. And so what happens over time is the soul, and it's living in the afterworld as opposed to coming back, that becomes it's much more dominant in our own thinking. Okay? It becomes the dominant thought process over Mechayeh HaMeitim. It's more relevant, it's less distant. All right, and so that over time, after the Messiah concept sort of fades into the background, the idea of the soul takes predominance. Does it make sense? Okay. The Mishnah divides the events surrounding death into 7 phases. The first is dying itself. The second is the interval between death and burial. The third is the burial or funeral. The fourth is the week that follows, Shiva. The fifth is the weeks that remain up to the passage of a month, Shloshim. The sixth is the remaining months up to the passage of a year, the Yortzeit. And the seventh, here's one you won't know, the seventh deals with a reburying of the bones at the end of a year in the Mishnah. Now, most of us are not familiar with that one. In Maccabees, we learn of Simon's reburying of Jonathan's bones in their ancestral home of Modin, reading number 4. This is from the book of Maccabees, which is part of the Apocrypha. All Israel bewailed him with great lamentation and mourned him many days. And Simon built a monument over the tomb of his father and his brothers. He made it high, with polished stone at the front and back. He also erected 7 pyramids, erecting about them great columns, and on the columns he put suits of armor for a permanent memorial. He carved ships so that they would be seen by all who sail to the sea. So let me take that apart a little bit here. There's first of all, metaphorical use of a ship. What's that telling you? They're on a journey. Very deliberately. It's not, the afterlife is a journey. So right there and then, Maccabees 100 years before, 150 years before the coming Jesus time, you've already got a recognition that there's an afterlife. There's a journey they're on. And then this idea of the reburying of bones. What would happen when someone died? We have these wonderful medical machines. We know when somebody's dead. Okay? We hope we do. Okay? I hope we do, personally. All right? And so you know when someone's dead and you go about it, and you know for sure. First of all, the minute you refrigerate them, they're gone anyway, one way or another. That's not what they did in the ancient world. They would put people in caves. Right? You see a lot of this discussion. They weren't buried in the ground. They were buried in the earth. Caves are the earth too. And they would put them in a cave for a year. The first thing is they'd go back after 3 days because they had learned that by 3 days the body had begun to decay and smell. If the smell was there, they were dead. Very pragmatic. And they left it there for a year because they learned that within a year all the flesh was gone. All that remained after a year were the bones. And so at that point, they buried the bones. The bones represented the eternity. The flesh went away. I suspect it is some attempt at it. By the way, when you say it is modern, you're talking about a couple hundred years. There's no laws on what needs to be done at an unveiling other than put up the stone. There's no ceremony. We create it. Okay? Right. There's no halakha. There's no Jewish law about it. But I do suspect, look, after a year, it serves a number of purposes. And then, Wendy, I saw your hand. I'll call on you a second. It serves a number of purposes. Number one, look, it forces the family to come back together and remember. And so it's a communal family regathering, another moment of remembering. And as I've realized with the loss of my mom, there's so many times in the course of a year where so I have my mom's birthday. I haven't forgotten that. That's a time of remembering. I have my mom's English date of death. I have my mom's Hebrew date of death. You have Mother's Day. You have 4 times a year we say Yisker. It's impossible to forget, even if you wanted to. Okay. And then you have this after a year as well. Wendy. She asked the same question. Okay. All right. And so, it's impossible to forget because they're just, and then there's just the natural, this is what I have in my house. I have my mom's Passover plates. Every time I pull out the plates, there's mom. Right? It just, whatever it is, there's 9 million memories involved in everything, and so you can't forget. In the ancient world, I imagine it was a lot more difficult. First of all, a lot more babies and everything died. It was just people only lived. So it was just constant. So they forced you to come together in a different way. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yes.
So the bottom line is.
The bottom line. So you want the Reader's Digest version, and I'm not going there. You're going to have to wait. Look, anything I tell you is a theory anyway. Right. I understand. Hold on to it. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking that, so in the Christian Bible, when Jesus' followers go back 3 days, time he's been resurrected, he's been following this custom.
Yeah, it's a custom of the time. It wasn't just a Jewish custom. It was a custom of the way that people did things. Make sure he's really dead. Yeah, absolutely. Makes perfect sense. Right. They go and they find the body's not there. There could be a million explanations for this, whatever. But from the Christian theological perspective, he's not there. He's not dead. Therefore, he's risen. Okay. But yes, the 3 days follows the same pattern. All right, just an interesting note. I really want to focus, I wanted to share with you that Judaism is a religion of life. We don't spend a lot of time focusing on death. I've said this before, when you say l'chaim, to life, it is not a toast, it is a mindset. It is a way of thinking. We focus. And so just two ways in which that plays out. This is according to the mission. If there's a funeral procession and a wedding procession, and they meet in the streets at the same time, the mourners should turn aside from the path of the bride. She gets priority. Now, I imagine in today's world we might think differently, but the rabbis were focusing on life takes priority. Another one is, should you have a choice or need to have to choose between paying a condolence call and attending the celebration for the birth of a child, you go to the birth of the child. Again, I imagine many of us in modern times might think differently. Yes. Brit Milah is done on the 8th day, no matter what day of the year, Yom Kippur, Shabbat, etc., unless the health of the child is an issue. Yeah, absolutely. It takes priority. So, Steve, I'm not really going to spend a lot more time on this issue here. The answer is there's lots of different understandings of what the afterlife is within Judaism. There is no official, this is the. We have everything from, it's not mainstream, but we have the idea of reincarnation. It's part of Jewish thought, which is more mystical, obviously. You're going to find that within Hasidic thought to a large extent. But as I described it before, there's some understanding that we will be held accountable, that we will have continued connection with God on some level, and we will be judged. What that means beyond that, the Jewish answer at the end of the day is, know that and live your life here. Be a good human being. When you get there, you'll deal with it. Okay? Because when I say anything else, there's 600 different opinions. And so anything else is vague. Those are the core beliefs. Yes, there is an afterlife. Yes, you will be judged, and there'll be reward and punishment. Yes, you'll have continued life with God. Now, there's study Torah with God. There's all sorts of things that that are portrayed in the tradition. Okay. All right. Let's look at the next blessing. Got 15 minutes to do kedusha. 161. I have a feeling we won't get through this, but let's see what we can do. There are 3 verses in this Kedusha. Kedusha means holy. The first 2 blessings were about God in history and God in nature. That's our understandings of God. In this blessing, I call it the etc., meaning it's the mystical. It's that about God which we have no words to describe. It's ephemeral. It's not something we can see, we just know. We know through a different lens, in a sense. Okay? And so it's sublime, that's the word. Rabbi Judah Halevy gives a distinctive nature of this 3rd blessing. He says, and this is, I think, reading number 5. Having read these paragraphs, which enlighten him in the belief that God keeps up a connection with this material world, the worshiper extols and sanctifies him by the declaration that no corporeal attitude pertains to him. God is bodiless. God is not within the material world per se. Many of the prayers address this. They call it, the word kadosh shows up constantly. You have kedusha, you have kiddush, you have kaddish, and then the marriage ceremony is called kiddushin. This holiness is constantly reflected in our prayers. Basically, all right, often translated as holy, what it really means is in some way it's set aside as special and distinct. It means unique. It's something that leads us to a higher spiritual level. Ultimately, God's essence is indefinable, and holiness is whatever God is. Whatever that is, that's holiness. And our job is to imitate whatever that is, to strive to connect with, to imitate, to make God a part of our lives in our attempt to reach that status and that state. We believe that with the tool, Judaism believes that the tool for doing that are mitzvot. And I don't mean good deeds, I mean laws. That through the laws we have the opportunity to emulate God and to strive for holiness. God heals the sick, we have an obligation to heal the sick. It's not, I feel like I'll go do a good deed today. That's our role. That's how we achieve holiness. That's how we become like God. So every mitzvah we fulfill is intended to make us holy. Rabbi Avraham Isaac Kook, reading number 6, the main characteristic of the virtue of man's holiness is that man thereby elevates himself to the point where all his efforts and considerations are not directed towards his own needs, but for the glory of the Master of the universe, for his holiness, for the fulfillment of the Creator's will. As long as man thinks only of perfecting himself, even spiritually, no kedusha is attained. If you are focused on your needs and you and who you are not focused on God. And that sense of kedusha you can't designate it to someone else. You can't say, Cantor, be kadosh for me. We all know that melody, right? Okay. Each person is responsible, each of us, by the way, by causing others to in some way recognize God and proclaim his holiness. That too is an act of kedusha. Yes, Wendy. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yes. Where life is at stake, not a sore throat, where life is at stake, all the laws go out the window, with the exception of a couple that we know, and even that's debatable. Okay? Life is primary. You can drive on Shabbat to save life. You can, if you have to, eat shrimp, eat shrimp. I don't know how that saves somebody's life, but, if it were to be able to, you can feed somebody shrimp or eat shrimp if your life, here, you're on a desert island, the only thing to eat is shrimp. You're going to die if you don't. Bateyavon. So what do we do with the book of life and God's writing in the book of life? How do we make sense of that? Is that did I miss the essence of your question? Yeah. That is the essence. Well, I'm saying, okay, God is actually writing in the book of life what you did, only you can see what you did and didn't do, even though you might have had it. And then when you pass away and when the Shema goes up to God, is he judging you? Or I know is he judging you, but is he kind of like, I don't know. All right, so let me just suggest, remember, in medieval times, they wrote a lot of poetry. That was their way of responding to horrific moments in history. One of the pieces of poetry written during that time was Unatana Tokef. In that poetry, he describes, this is not biblical, this is medieval poetry. Barosh Hashanah Yikatevu, Uviyom Tzom Kippur Yechatemun. Those are the words of the writer of the medieval times. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed. That is medieval poetry. The book of life is rabbinic. It is not Torah. It is a metaphor. To believe in it literally would mean, here's my argument that makes it a falsehood. The year my mom died, does that mean she was evil? Evil. She deserved to die that year. But isn't that what the book of life and the book, doesn't that what the prayer would imply if you take it literally? Right? So I argue it isn't meant to be taken literally. However, with that in mind, live your life as if it were. The world will be a much better place. Okay? It is an image. It is an analogy. It is the word fable sounds terrible, but it's a fable in the sense it's meant to teach us something from the image that is offered to us in that poetry. Because otherwise, everyone who dies that year, they must have been horrible. They're 107 and they died. They were bad in their 106th year. No, at 107 you die. Okay? The body just wears out. All right? That it is meant to say there's a way to live life and there's a way not to live life. All right, so I don't believe that death is a judgment in reality, because otherwise my whole sense of the world doesn't work. Yeah. Okay? Can I accept that following death there's judgment? Yes, I can. I really processed this a lot. The year my mom died really forced me to sit down and say, what do I believe? Can that be a real statement, or is it meant symbolically? And I fully believe it's symbolic. And anybody who's lost somebody would have to show me why I'm wrong. All right, we're on page 161 of the Kedusha. I want to talk to you about the practices that are involved in saying Kedusha. If the Amidah is the highlight, it is the apex of the service, which it is, the Kedusha is the apex of the Amidah. This is the top of the top of the top. It's the Melech HaMelachim. It's the King of Kings. It's the top of the top. All right? And so, the tradition says that when we recite it, we do so standing and with our feet together through the whole thing. All right? It's described as feet together. There's a description in Ezekiel of the angels, and their feet were straight together. We emulate that as part of the process. We also do so as a way of communicating, I have nowhere to go. I am focused. It's like covering your head with the tallis. I'm completely focused. I have nowhere else to run. My thoughts and everything about me is directed to God in this moment. All interruptions are to be avoided. And they even go so far as to say, if you've already prayed on your own and you find yourself in the presence of a minyan and Kedusha is being repeated, join it. If you have not yet finished your private prayers, we'll always say, please finish your individual prayers as the communion will go on. What if you're still praying as you go to get to the Kedusha? Stop your prayers and join in the Kedusha and then go on. This is the core. No one should ever leave or enter the sanctuary during the Kedusha. All right. Next. When we say Kadosh, 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 this is the line from Isaiah. It is customary to rise up on your toes 3 times, as if the angel's wings of which it describes, they're lifting us up off our feet. It's an airflow thing. All right? There's a sense of rising above nature. We just finished Gevurot, which is all about nature. Here we come into the next one and sort of rising above that, stepping above to reach for the spark of God that extends beyond nature. Some people do the same thing. There's 3 biblical verses here. There's Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. We all sing that. There's Baruch Kavod Adonai Mim Kamal. We all sing that. And then there's Yimloch Adonai Le'olam. All 3 of these biblical verses, they're verses, that's the nature of the Amidah, and then there's things that surround it, sort of talking about introducing them. We're going to say, Nikadesh et Shimcha, we will declare your greatness, and that's the introduction to Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. There's these little verses in between that introduce the biblical verses, but some people will go up on their toes each of the 3 times they say those 3 verses, me included. Doesn't mean it's right, you do. In Nikadesh Chimcha Ba'olam Kishen Shemakdishim Oto Bishmei Marom Kakatuv Al Yad Neviyecha, and then Bikara Zeh El Zeh, and they called one to the other the angels. There's a tradition of representing that by doing this, one to the other. So Bikara Zeh El Zeh Ve'amar. Right, feet together, hopping up a little bit. Bikara Zeh El Zeh. The one thing to note with the Kedusha, and really which expresses its centrality, is this is the part of the Amidah you cannot say without a minyan. You can say the rest of it. As a matter of fact, if you look at the bottom, you look at the end, the blessing at the end of Lador Vador, you'll see Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. All right, God who is holy, who is Kadosh. Flip the page to 162. The following paragraph is said only when the Amidah is recited silently. In other words, you don't say Kedusha silently. Instead, you say these 3 lines, but look at what the blessing is. Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. The blessing is the same. What precedes the blessing is distinct. You can say this when you don't have a minyan silently. When you have a minyan, you have the opportunity to expand it into the full Kedusha. I think that's all I've got. Okay, any questions on anything we covered? Yeah, Jeff.
Earlier on, you was talking about the resurrection, or the dead having some kind of afterlife. You said that was not biblical.
Right.
Like yesterday's Torah portion, it's full of references when people died being returned to their next of kin.
Yeah, Vayasef El Amav. In other words, they were buried with it literally meant what it says. They were returned to their relatives who were also buried there. Right? There's no super understanding of this. It's what it means. Vayigva Vayamot, and they died. Vayasef El Amav, and they were gathered unto their people.
But it's not talking about having
Not in the Bible. Unless all the other verses are this is different from the rest. No. Yeah, because they try to avoid it. The answer is Mechaye Hametim, who gives Chaye, to the dead. It's not who life and death. They keep trying to. This book, it's wonderful, has lots of explanations. Its translations are short of what they should be. And they've made nicey out of it because people may not be comfortable with this idea of Mechaye Amitim. By the way, there are different opinions on this. I saw in an amazing debate between Elliot Dorff, who is the chief theologian at the UJ, with Neil Gilman, who's the chief theologian at the seminary. They're good friends, and they had a tremendous argument as to whether or not this is meant to be taken literally. Gilman says absolutely, and Dorff says absolutely not. Okay? Brilliant minds both. Show me anything in philosophy where people agree. Yes.
One last thing I have to put throw in the funny, I was studying about the dry bones, and someone made a comment, that's where that song came from, dry bones, how heal the Lord is the Lord. And it just popped in my brain.
Okay. I don't know the song, but it does sound like it. Yeah.
But I thought that it popped in my brain when we were talking about the dry bones.
Yeah, the vision of the dry bones is very commonly cited both in Judaism and Christianity, because it reflects the concept, even though it isn't meant literally. It literally is talking about Israel. It's been superimposed in the concept of resurrection on it, and so both religions have grabbed onto it, even though that's not what it's saying, to make it personal as opposed to national. Yeah. They do. Yeah, if you go look at a Reform prayer book, it will not use the phrase Mechayeh Amitim in the Hebrew at all. They changed it to Mechayeh HaKol, who gives life to everything. That's a very different message. But it is the message that they're conveying. Again, one of the things I do say is you need to be consistent. If that's your theology, that's what your prayer should say.
In the new Reformed prayer book, in brackets, they say.
All right. All right, so they've put back what the traditional would say. Look, it's funny because even our prayer book, there's a line in the Amidah that you may notice I use a different word. All right? When I repeat it out loud, I don't say what's in this prayer book. Let me find it for you for a second. I say what was in the Silverman Siddur. It's going way back. Yes, I've dated myself. Someone has to date me. It's a bad joke, sorry. All right, let me find okay. There's a paragraph, "V'lo netato Adonai Eloheinu l'goyei haratzot." But Adonai, your God, you have not given the Torah to the nation and Shabbat to the nations of the world. Nor our sovereign have you bestowed it upon idol worshippers. And then the next line says, "V'gam b'minuchato," and the rest of Shabbat, the rest period of Shabbat, "Lo yishkanu," you haven't given to, in the Siddur that we have actually it's a more traditional response actually, it says to the Arelim, the uncircumcised. All right, in the Silverman Siddur, what it said is, "V'lo yishkanu rishaim," you haven't given to those who are evil. That makes me much more comfortable. In other words, Shabbat can be held by any. You don't have to be circumcised to have Shabbat. The Arelim. For me, it's about evil. If you don't stand up and if you're not striving for kedusha, you're the one who doesn't get Shabbat. So, although the traditional text says Arelim, Silverman used the text Rishaim, and even though that's what's sitting in front of you, and when I repeat it, I don't say that. I say Rishaim. And the fact that there's another conservative Siddur that said that gives me at least viability. So on page 163, the top paragraph, there's 3 lines in smaller print. And by the way, they were sufficiently uncomfortable with saying that, you'll notice it's in smaller print and it says some omit. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure in its early stages it was the Christians and later Muslims are circumcised too. So, yeah, I think look, remember the fact that Jews were powerless to fight back. And so they fought back in language. They fought back in rhetoric. And so this was a way of striking back when you're powerless. Right? And I'm uncomfortable with that in today's world. And I've gotten rid of the Arelim, and I'll say Rishaim, which applies to anybody. And it could apply to Jews. I don't know. I don't know why they chose to go back to Arelim in this prayer book. I wasn't there when they had the conversation, but I choose not to embrace that concept. All right, there's a number of things. If you watch when I'm doing services, I do very deliberately. There's another one in Aleinu. We get to, let's turn to let's find Aleinu. Mitachat. I'll show you where we go. Page 205. Okay. You have in the middle of the page with the little thing, Vanachnu Korim Mishtachavim, go down. Let me see if I can find it. And then we get to Shehu Notesh Shamayim V'Yosei Haaretz. All right, the last line, V'Yal Haaretz Mitachat Einod. And the melody is, Ki Adonai Hu Elohim B'Shamayim Imal V'Yal Haaretz Mitachat. And I don't do that. Why don't I do that? I do Why do I change it? What does the word tachat mean? Under. If you're going to sing under a word that goes yadai, doesn't make sense to me. The melody should reflect what you're saying. In contrast, sometimes I'll do in the line before, Ki Adonai hu Elohim b'shamayim ma'al, and I'll go up. Ma'al is high. So I make the melody fit the meaning of the words. I don't care what the traditional melodies say. I'm going to change it because the melodies are essentially, in terms of reflecting what they're saying, are wrong in certain places. Why do we do 4 times? We do at the end, Shemo, Shemo, Shemo Echad, Ushemo Echad. We add the 4th. Why? What does 3 times God mean? Trinity. His name is one, his name is one, his name is one. I hear a Trinity. So to avoid that concept, we added a 4th to the melody. Because the melody didn't come from Sinai. Understand that. Somebody wrote the melody. All right? So to avoid any hint at a Trinity, we add the 4th. There's a lot of those kinds of things built into the melodies of the service. That's my job. Right? Right. Say that again. They should. Another one is in the Shema. The very end of the Shema. Yeah, we all sing, Ani Adonai Elohechem, and I am the Lord your God. Wait a minute. I'm not. Neither are you. And so I got from Rabbi Potok in New York. He says, you never say that phrase without saying the word emet, meaning there's a truth to it, somehow distinguishing that you are not. What you're talking about, it's a truth that God is God. So, Ani Adonai Elohechem emet is what you'll hear me do. There's a lot, again, every time I go through this, I actually think of the person who told me something as I'm doing it. It brings me back to that moment. All right. Anyway, prayer book is fun. We'll be back next week. We're going to meet next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Okay. Now I've dated myself completely. Okay. All right. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy it's a great week not to be a turkey. Yeah, well, so